The biting wind seeped through the broken slats of the overcrowded barracks, carrying with it the stench of damp earth, sweat, and despair. Miriam Weiss sat huddled in the corner, her thin frame trembling as she wrapped her hands around a small bundle concealed beneath her tattered shawl. Inside, carefully wrapped in bits of torn cloth, lay a handful of dried herbs and crushed spices, a secret treasure she'd hidden long ago, a fragile spark of hope amid the suffocating darkness. Her eyes, sharp and haunted, flicked across the dimly lit room, catching glimpses of other prisoners lost in their own sufferings. Muted sobs, whispered prayers, the shuffle of feet. She clenched her jaw, trying to steady her racing thoughts. Her mind drifted back to her childhood, the sound of her students' laughter echoing faintly, now replaced by the hollow silence of death and oppression. She remembered the last words she'd spoken to her family before their deportation. "Hold on. Stay strong," she whispered softly, her voice trembling with a mixture of grief and fierce determination. Now, her circumstances had stripped her of everything but her wits and her resolve. She knew she couldn't wait passively for salvation or death. If she was to survive, she would have to craft her own salvation from the scraps of her knowledge and the faint hope that still flickered within her. Her eyes darted to the barred window, where the weak winter sun struggled through a crack, casting feeble light on the icy floor. She reached into her pocket, fingers brushing against a tiny vial she'd managed to hide. A minuscule container of poison, a carefully measured dose gleaned from her limited supplies and knowledge. Her heart hammered in her chest as she pressed, her palm against her side, feeling the rough outline of a small, sharpened piece of metal she'd hidden. Her last, silent weapon. She knew the risks. Discovery, execution, or worse, the complete annihilation of hope. But within her burned an unyielding fire, a conviction that her act, small and clandestine as it might be, could ignite the flames of rebellion. Her gaze hardened as she looked at the guards patrolling outside, their silhouettes stark against the snow. Oblivious to the storm of resistance brewing quietly within her, she whispered to herself, "For them, for my family, for justice," before slowly rising, clutching her herbs and her deadly secret, preparing for the moment when her carefully laid plan would ignite amidst the cold shadows of her prison, turning her suffering into a weapon of defiance. In the dim, flickering light of her small makeshift cell, Miriam's trembling fingers reached beneath a loose stone embedded in the wall, a familiar, reassuring pressure guiding her to the tiny, hidden compartment she had clandestinely carved into her ration bag days ago. Carefully, she retrieved a minuscule container, no larger than her thumb, filled with a carefully curated collection of dried herbs, crushed spices, and a few tiny fragments of a bitter root she had managed to smuggle from her previous clandestine meetings. Her heart pounded fiercely as she clutched the fragile vessel, knowing that within that small jar lay her carefully measured doses of poison, an act of quiet rebellion etched out against the brutal machinery of the camp. She pressed her fingertips gently over the lid, feeling the roughness of the clay, the faint scent of coriander and dried chili, ingredients that once flavored her simple home-cooked meals, and now, in this moment, became her clandestine arsenal. Her eyes darted around the shadows, every sound heightened. An inmate coughing, a guard's muffled footsteps outside, each a reminder of her peril. "This is for them," she whispered softly, voice trembling yet resolute. "For my family, for every soul lost to their cruelty." She carefully unscrewed the tiny lid with a makeshift nail, revealing the powdered mixture, her secret weapon, meticulously crafted through nights of studying old medicinal texts she had secretly hidden from the guards. With a steady, deliberate hand, She poured a small, precise amount into a piece of bread she'd fashioned from the scraps of prison rations, mixing it with her fingers as quietly as possible, ensuring the scent of her herbs was masked by the camp's stale air. Miriam's gaze flicked toward the door, her breath hitching as she saw the guards approaching, their heavy boots echoing in the silence. Her mind raced, imagining the chaos her actions would unleash, her daring act of defiance to turn her prison meal into a silent, deadly insurgency. She clenched her jaw, whispered a silent prayer, and then, with a swift, practiced motion, slipped the poisoned bread into her pocket, feeling the weight of her hope settle heavily against her chest. Every fiber of her being told her this small act of rebellion, cloaked in secrecy, could ignite the spark of resistance, a quiet but fierce testament that even in the darkest depths of despair, ingenuity, and courage could forge a path toward justice. In the dim, flickering shadows of the prison's cold corridor, Miriam crouched behind a stack of empty crates, ears tuned to the muffled voices drifting from the guard tower. Her breath hitched as she caught snippets of their conversation, each word a thread in the fragile tapestry of her daring plan. Captain Krause's voice was sharp but low. They're most vulnerable during mealtime, when they're distracted, complacent, and the food is being served. Another guard, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, chuckled softly. That's when we can slip in and out without much trouble. They never suspect a thing when their bellies are full. Miriam's eyes narrowed, her pulse pounding like a drumbeat in her ears. She quietly pressed her fingertips against her lips trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. Carefully, she reached into her worn pocket, clutching the small collection of herbs and spices she'd painstakingly gathered. Her secret arsenal. Her mind spun with possibilities. If I could tamper with their meals, she thought, inject something harmless but enough to make them sick, enough to send a message, to weaken their confidence, to create chaos. She visualized the guards, eating their monotonous, greasy rations, their faces slack with dull anticipation, unaware that their routine was about to be shattered. Her fingers brushed the rough fabric of her makeshift pouch, her heart pounding louder. She imagined herself slipping past the guards during the meal service, the faint scent of her herbs masking the faint metallic tang of her hidden toxin. Her eyes darted toward the narrow slit of light beneath the door, signaling a shift change. An opportune moment. This is the window, she thought fiercely. Her breath caught again as a guard's voice floated closer. Just keep your eyes peeled. These prisoners might try something. We can't let our guard down, not even during feeding. Miriam's stomach clenched, her throat tightened with the enormity of what she was about to undertake. She clenched her fists, knowing that the coming seconds would determine whether her act would be a flicker of hope or a deadly mistake. Her gaze fixed on the prison yard beyond the barred window, where prisoners shuffled in silence, their faces etched with despair and resilience. Every moment was weighted with finality, the culmination of her silent rebellion, her way to strike back not with guns or screams, but with a quiet, cunning poison concealed in her own carefully prepared food. As she slowly withdrew her hand, her eyes flicked back to her hidden stash, promising herself that this small act could ignite a spark, a whisper of resistance in the heart of darkness. She whispered a silent prayer, then, with deliberate calm, prepared to turn her prison meal into a weapon, her subtle yet deadly answer to the brutality surrounding her. Miriam's trembling hands moved cautiously, almost reverently, as she rummaged through a hidden fold of her ragged blanket, revealing a tiny collection of salvaged chemicals, powdered herbs, a scrap of bitter root, a few drops of an oily substance she had managed to conceal from the guards' watchful eyes. Her breath hitched with a mixture of trepidation and fierce determination. The dim candlelight flickered weakly, casting jagged shadows across her weathered face as she studied each item, her fingers instinctively testing their weight, consistency, and scent. She remembered her old classroom, how she would carefully measure ingredients for experiments, how she'd analyze reactions with a scientist's precision. Only now, her lab was a prison cell, and her subjects were her captors. She whispered softly to herself, "This will work. I have to make it work." Her mind raced, visualizing her plan. The next meal, carefully prepared, served with her own secret ingredients. She pictured the guards' faces, confident, oblivious, and how, in a matter of moments, their routines would be shattered. Her eyes flicked to the small broken spoon she'd hidden in her shoe, a makeshift tool to measure and mix with utmost precision. Her pulse pounded as she added a pinch of crushed herbs to a piece of stale bread, mixing in a few drops of the oily substance from a tiny vial she had smuggled from her belongings before her arrest. The taste of bitter herbs lingered on her tongue as she murmured, "Just enough, no more, no less." Every second felt electric. Her heartbeat echoed loudly in her ears. She knew that timing was crucial. She had to be exact, stealthy, untraceable. Her eyes darted to the small battered cup she used for her meager rations, now transformed into her covert vessel. Carefully, she poured the mixture into the bread, sealing it with a nervous but resolute grip. As she slipped the poisoned food into her pocket, her mind replayed the safety protocols she'd devised, her mental checklist, her contingency plans. If they suspect, I'll deny everything. If I'm caught, it's the end of everything, she whispered fiercely, clutching her hidden stash as if gripping a lifeline. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling slowly, trying to steady her racing thoughts. Her eyes glinted with a mix of fierce hope and quiet fear. This small act, so fragile yet so deadly, was her silent rebellion, her voice in the darkness of oppression. She knew that with each step toward the next meal, she carried not just her own destiny, but the hope of others who dared to believe that even in the depths of despair, cunning and courage could forge a path toward justice. Elias leaned in close, his brow furrowed as Miriam unrolled a smuggled scrap of cloth, stained with her carefully gathered herbs and powders. The dim candlelight flickered weakly in the damp, fog-filled cell, casting long shadows that danced across their tense faces. "You really think this will work?" Elias whispered, voice trembling but laced with a flicker of admiration. Miriam's eyes sparkled with a fierce resolve. "It has to. I've studied the chemistry, the reactions, the right combination of herbs, bitters, and a dash of poison from the small vial I managed to hide. Nothing detectable to the guards, but lethal enough to weaken them from within." She touched the outline of a small glass container tucked into her coat, the secret core of her plan. "We'll use bread, the guards' favorite meal. They're careless during their shifts. Sometimes they leave their food unattended, overconfident in their invincibility. That's where we strike." Elias nodded, pulling out a tiny sharpened spoon he'd hidden from the camp's kitchen, the metal gleaming faintly. "So, what's the recipe? How do we make sure they eat it, without suspicion?" Miriam gripped his shoulder, her voice low but commanding. "We infuse the mixture into the dough, knead it thoroughly so it's indistinguishable. We'll bake it just like the others, but with one crucial difference. This batch is infused with my carefully calculated toxin. I've tested small amounts. It acts slowly, giving us enough time to get away before symptoms hit." She handed Elias a small folded parchment with her precise measurements and instructions. "Once baked, we'll hide the bread in the usual storage next to the others. When the guards come for their meal, I'll slip this into their ration tray. No one will suspect a thing, especially if I look nervous or distracted. The key is timing. We have one shot at this, Elias. Once they eat, we wait. If everything goes right, we'll have taken a step toward justice in this hellhole. Elias hesitated, eyes flickering with a mixture of fear and admiration. You're risking everything for this. But I get it. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for everyone who's been broken here. Miriam's jaw tightened as she nodded. Exactly. It's more than revenge. It's about making them pay for what they've done. We're fighting with their own weapons. Cunning, silence, and a little bit of hope, disguised as bread. We'll do this tonight. And if we succeed, it'll be the first small victory in a much longer war. As they carefully packed their clandestine ingredients into a battered metal box, the weight of her plan settled heavily on Miriam's shoulders. Every second counted, every detail mattered. In that suffocating darkness, her heart pounded with a mixture of fear, fierce determination, and the unshakable belief that even within the depths of despair, intelligence and courage could carve out a sliver of justice. In the dim silence of the prison's mess hall, Miriam's fingers trembled slightly as she carefully removed a small, worn cloth bag from the folds of her tattered coat. Her eyes darted nervously toward Elias, who stood nearby, a mixture of apprehension and unwavering resolve etched into every line of his face. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone, stale bread, and the faint herbal aroma Miriam had managed to conceal beneath her sleeve, an aroma that now carried the weight of imminent danger. She gently unscrewed the lid of a tiny vial hidden inside her palm, its dark contents gleaming ominously in the flickering candlelight. "This is it," she whispered softly, voice trembling but steady, as she carefully dripped a few drops into a piece of bread she had secretly prepared earlier, mixing her poison with a precision born from desperation and ingenuity. Elias watched, intently, eyes wide, lips pressed into a thin line. "Are you sure this will work?" he asked in a hushed, trembling voice, worry shadowing his features. Miriam nodded firmly, her brow furrowed with concentration. "It has to. This is the only shot we've got. Once I slip it into the food, we need to act fast. They won't suspect a thing." She reached out and gently placed the tainted bread on a battered ceramic plate, her hand steady despite her pounding heart. Her gaze lingered on Elias's face, searching for reassurance amid the chaos. "Remember," she added softly, "if anything goes wrong, if they discover us, there's no turning back. We're gambling everything on this single move." Elias swallowed hard and nodded, his voice thick with resolve. "Then let's do it. For everyone we've lost, for all of us fighting in the shadows." With a final silent exchange of determined glances, Miriam slid the bread onto the guard's table as they approached in methodical lines, oblivious to the treacherous gift embedded within. Her breath hitched as she watched them take their positions, every nerve taut like a bowstring. As one guard reached out and bit into the bread, Miriam's stomach clenched with anticipation, fear and hope intertwined, knowing that this small act of rebellion might ignite a spark of defiance in the suffocating darkness of their captivity. Narrative development following. As the guards begin serving the meal, Miriam's heart races. Some guards start to exhibit symptoms of poisoning, dizziness, nausea, while others remain unaffected, creating chaos and confusion among the camp's oppressive routine. The story continues exploring the central themes of the original prompt, with unique characters and engaging situations that keep the reader interested in the development of events and conflicts presented in a rich and detailed manner. The faint scent of herbs and something sharper, perhaps a trace of the poison Miriam had carefully concealed, wafted unexpectedly across the tense air of the dining hall catching the attention of Guard Steiner as he approached the makeshift table where Miriam nervously arranged the prisoner's meager meal, his brow furrowed as he sniffed the air, nostrils flaring slightly, a flicker of suspicion igniting in his eyes. "What's that smell?" he demanded, voice edged with both curiosity and suspicion, stepping closer and narrowing his gaze at Miriam's trembling hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her mind raced to maintain composure, to mask the panic threatening to unravel her carefully woven plan. She forced a calm facade, clutching the edge of her battered tray, as if it were her only anchor. "Nothing, sir," she whispered, voice trembling just enough to sound innocent. Yet her eyes darted subtly toward the prisoner's plates, gauging their reactions. "I must have used a new spice blend. Perhaps it's too strong." Her words sounded plausible, but Steiner's sharp eyes caught the slight tremor in her voice, the rapid flutter of her eyelids, small but revealing signs of her inner turmoil. As he leaned closer, nostrils flaring again, Miriam's mind spun into overdrive. This could blow her cover, ruin everything she'd sacrificed, or buy her precious seconds to act. She subtly shifted her weight, pretending to check the contents of the plates in front of her, deliberately tilting her spoon just enough to smear a tiny amount of her hidden toxin onto her finger, then discreetly dab it onto her lips while maintaining eye contact. "Careful with your spices," Steiner muttered, voice low but tinged with suspicion, before turning on his heel to scrutinize other prisoners. Miriam exhaled silently, her heart pounding in her ears as she watched him disappear into the shadows. Her fingers trembled as she carefully manipulated the next plate, adjusting her movements with practiced precision, all the while feigning casual indifference. Every second teetered on the edge of discovery. Each glance from Steiner felt like a blade poised to cut her fragile disguise. Yet within her, a fierce resolve burned brighter than ever. She would outwit this guard, preserve her plan, and turn her own vulnerability into a weapon of silent rebellion. The danger was real, the stakes impossibly high. But Miriam's mind clung to one unwavering truth. In this suffocating darkness, cunning and courage were her only salvation. As the first guard collapsed onto the cold, damp ground, his face twisting, in agony, Miriam's stomach clenched with a flood of conflicting emotions. She stood frozen for a heartbeat, her breath hitching as the chaos erupted around her. Guards shouting orders, prisoners recoiling in fear, the distant crackle of fire crackling through the camp. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from the weight of what she had just done. "Was it right?" she whispered under her breath, eyes darting from the fallen guard to the others, still on their patrol, their faces twisted with confusion and fatigue. Sweat slicked her palms as she watched another guard clutch his stomach, stumbling backward, eyes wide with panic. They fell one after another, 6, 7, 8, each collapsing with agonized screams that pierced the suffocating silence of the camp. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a sickening mix of triumph and dread gnawing at her conscience. "This is justice," she told herself desperately. "They deserve this for what they've done." Yet a little voice deep inside questioned her morality, whispering that revenge blurred the lines of what was right and wrong. She clenched her fists, trying to steady her trembling knees, as a guard staggered toward her, eyes glassy and unfocused. "What? What's happening?" he gasped, voice cracked with pain. She wanted to tell him she was sorry, that this was the only way. But her throat clenched, and all she could do was watch helplessly as he crumpled to the ground, gasping in his final breath. The scene was a macabre tableau, guards writhing in agony amidst a cloud of confusion and fear, while Miriam's mind raced, torn between justification and guilt. Her breath hitched painfully as she realized the depth of what she had wrought. Her act of defiance had ignited a fire of chaos, But at what cost? Could she still call it justice when the aftermath was this brutal, this visceral? In that suffocating moment, Miriam understood that her desperate act had forever altered her soul. She had become both avenger and executioner, haunted by a culpability that no act of rebellion could fully absolve. Captain Friedrich Krauss stormed into the dimly lit mess hall, his steely eyes narrowing as they scanned the chaos sprawled across the room. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burnt wood and the sharp tang of panic, the flickering flames casting jagged shadows on the battered walls. His gaze settled on the overturned tables, scattered utensils, and the handful of prisoners, huddled in fear, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. A faint smell of bitter almonds clung to the air, an ominous sign of the poison that had infiltrated their guards. Krauss's jaw clenched tightly as he pushed forward, his boots pounding against the cracked concrete. His voice cut through the murmur of terrified whispers. "What's happened here? Who's responsible?" His eyes locked onto Miriam, who stood stiffly, her fists clenched, trembling slightly but determined. "Speak, prisoner," he snapped, voice cold and commanding. She swallowed hard, the adrenaline making her heart pound against her ribs. She met his gaze with defiance buried beneath her trembling veneer. "I don't know what you mean, sir," she whispered, voice barely steady. Krauss's face twisted into a cruel smile as he stepped closer, towering over her. "Don't play me for a fool," he spat. "The signs are clear. Poison. Someone's been tampering with the food supplies, and I know enough to see the lies behind those innocent eyes." He gestured sharply to the guards who writhed on the ground, clutching their guts, faces contorted in agony. His eyes darted to the unconscious men, then back to Miriam, with suspicion and fury. "You're hiding something," Krauss hissed, "and if you think I'll let this slide, you're gravely mistaken. You're all going to pay for this betrayal." His voice rose as he drew a pistol, pressing the cold barrel against Miriam's temple. "Tell me who did this, or I'll make sure every last one of you suffers the same fate." Miriam's breath hitched as her mind spun, the weight of her secret pressing down on her like a boulder. Her eyes flicked to Elias, the trusted prisoner, who had helped prepare the tainted food. His face pale but resolute. She knew that her act of defiance had ignited the flames of rebellion. But now, face to face with Krauss's wrath, she wondered if it had sealed her fate, and theirs, with a single irreversible stroke. The captain's grip on the pistol tightened, his eyes blazing with cold resolve. "Time's up," he growled. "Speak now, or I'll see how long your silence lasts in the darkness." The room seemed to hold its breath as Miriam's hands clenched into fists, her mind racing for one last hope, an escape, a lie, anything to stop the impending brutality. But deep inside, she understood that this was the moment her secret would either shatter or save them all. The moment felt like an abyss swallowing her whole. Miriam's body trembled beneath the brutal grip of Captain Krauss, his gaunt face twisted with contempt as he slammed her against the cold, damp wall of the interrogation chamber. Her lip bled where he had struck her earlier, the sharp sting lingering as she struggled to steady her breath. Sweat and blood blurred her vision, but her eyes, fierce and unyielding, remained fixed on Krauss's icy gaze. "You thought you could outsmart us, didn't you?" he sneered, voice low but venomous. "Your little plans, your poison, they were nothing but foolish dreams." His rough hand seized her chin, forcing her head back so she faced him squarely. "You're a traitor, a liar, and now you'll pay the price for your defiance." Miriam's chest tightened, the weight of despair pressing down as her mind raced for any shred of hope, any last-ditch escape. But every door seemed sealed, every avenue closed. Her body ached from the savage beating, her muscles screaming in protest. Her vision dimmed at the edges. Her thoughts flickered like dying candle flames. She knew her secret, the poison, the plan, the uprising, had been uncovered. Her quiet rebellion shattered into fragments. Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain alone, but from the crushing certainty that her effort to ignite change might have ended here, in blood and darkness. Kraus yanked her head forward roughly. "You're going to talk," he growled, voice thick with menace. "And if you don't, I'll make sure every last one of your friends suffers just like you." Her heart pounded, a deafening drum in her ears as helplessness threatened to drown her. She looked around desperately, sensing that her chance for salvation had slipped through her fingers like sand. The room spun, shadows dancing as silence stretched into an oppressive void. Every second dragged heavier, the suffocating weight of her failure settling into her bones. She wondered fleetingly if this would be her end, if her story would fade into the abyss, a whisper of courage lost in the shadows of despair. Yet somewhere deep within, a flicker of defiance still burned, faint but unbroken, urging her to hold on, to resist, even as the darkness closed in. In the suffocating darkness of her cell, Miriam felt her heart pounding like a relentless drum, each beat echoing her desperation and resolve. The rough hands of Captain Kraus had left her bruised and trembling, her body aching from the brutal interrogation, yet her mind remained sharp and fiercely alert. Amidst the chaos of her thoughts, she sensed a faint, almost imperceptible movement nearby, an almost ghostly touch on her wrist. She blinked through the haze of pain and saw Elias, her silent confidant, crouched beside her with a small, carefully concealed object in his trembling hand. His eyes, filled with an urgent, reckless determination, met hers, a simple, jagged piece of metal, sharpened secretly during their brief moments of respite. Elias whispered hoarsely, voice trembling but steady. "I managed to hide this, just in case. It's not much, but it'll give you a fighting chance." Miriam's eyes widened with a mixture of shock and profound gratitude as she grasped the makeshift knife, its cold, rough edge pressing against her palm. For a moment she hesitated, recalling her teachings of morality, yet the blazing fire of her hunger for justice quelled her doubts. Her voice barely above a whisper, she responded, "If they come for me again, I'll use it. I won't go quietly." Elias nodded silently, his face etched with fear but also fierce loyalty. As the guards momentarily turned their backs, Miriam pressed the knife against her side, feeling the sharpness bite into her skin, an act of defiance that symbolized her refusal to surrender to despair. She knew this was her moment of fragile rebellion, a delicate balance between hope and peril. And with trembling resolve, she prepared herself to act, either to fight her way out or to die trying, clutching the tiny, dangerous hope that even in captivity, her spirit could ignite a spark of resistance that might someday burn brighter beyond these walls. Narrative development following. During her brutal confinement, Miriam uses her cunning to feign compliance and secretly communicates with a small group of prisoners, secretly rallying them for a covert uprising, emphasizing her resolve to turn suffering into resistance. The story continues exploring the central themes of the original prompt, with unique characters and engaging situations that keep the reader interested in the development of events and conflicts, presented in a rich and detailed manner. In the suffocating darkness of the prison camp, Miriam's heart pounded with a fierce blend of fear and determination. She knew that to turn the tide, she needed to create chaos on her own terms, to distract the guards long enough for her to execute the final phase of her daring plan. Carefully, she slipped a small, smuggled piece of cloth soaked in flammable, oil into a narrow crack in the wooden barracks wall, barely more than a whisper of flame waiting to ignite. As she moved swiftly through the shadows, her eyes flicked toward the guards patrolling nearby, their heavy boots thudding rhythmically. She took a deep breath, clutching her secret, and muttered under her breath, "Now or never." With a sharp strike of a match, the small fire burst into life, quickly catching onto the old wood and dry straw strewn inside. A tinderbox of destruction. Flames licked hungrily up the walls, illuminating the darkness with a flickering, sinister glow. The chaos erupted instantly. Guards shouted orders, their voices rising in panic as they rushed toward the blaze. Miriam, hidden behind the cover of smoke and shadows, seized the moment. She watched as a guard, caught in the flickering light, froze in confusion, shouting into the chaos, "Fire! Fire in the east wing! Get everyone out!" The flames rapidly spread, crackling and hissing as they devoured the decaying structure, casting an eerie, dancing glow across the camp. The prisoners, momentarily distracted, stirred from their forced silence, whispers of hope spreading like sparks through dry tinder. Miriam's pulse hammered in her ears as she darted silently past stunned guards, overwhelmed by the inferno, her mind racing with plans to exploit the diversion. Her eyes met Elias's across the chaos, his face a mixture of awe and fear, and she nodded subtly, signaling that her plan was in motion. The guards, now frantic, scrambled to contain the fire, some dousing it with limited buckets, others shouting orders to evacuate, their focus entirely absorbed by the engulfing flames. Meanwhile, Miriam slipped away into the shadows, knowing that this fiery distraction had bought her precious minutes, a window to slip past the guards or rally her allies for the next step. Every second counted as the smoke thickened, obscuring vision, deafening the screams and shouts around her. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her senses heightened, acutely aware of the fragile balance she maintained. Her daring act of sabotage was a gamble, but one that could ignite the spark of rebellion that might someday lead to their liberation. Narrative development following. Capitalizing on the chaos, Miriam confronts Captain Kraus directly, using her quick wit to slip a lethal dose of poison into his food during a moment when he is isolated, executing her plan to kill him with a poison she crafted during her captivity. The story continues exploring the central themes of the original prompt, with unique characters and engaging situations that keep the reader interested in the development of events and conflicts presented in a rich and detailed manner. Narrative. Development following. Her act of poisoning Kraus symbolizes her moral defiance and ingenuity, as she watches him collapse, embodying her determination to challenge the systemic evil through her own cleverness instead of brute violence alone. The story continues exploring the central themes of the original prompt, with unique characters and engaging situations that keep the reader interested in the development of events and conflicts presented in a rich and detailed manner. Amidst the swirling chaos ignited by Miriam's daring act, the camp erupted into a disarray that no guard could contain. The fire she set in the distant corner crackled fiercely, its flickering flames casting jagged shadows on the cold, barbed wire fences and illuminating the frantic movements of prisoners scrambling for any chance to escape. Screams and shouts blurred together, the cacophony of violence and desperation echoing across the frozen ground. Miriam's heart pounded fiercely in her chest, not from fear, but from a surge of fierce resolve. She darted between the collapsing guards, slipping through the tangled mass of prisoners, her eyes scanning for a clear route. "Go, now, quickly!" She barked softly to a few fellow prisoners she trusted, pushing them in the right direction while she kept a wary eye on the chaos behind her. Her fingers clutched a small hidden tool she'd secreted during her captivity, her lifeline in this final act. As the guards struggled to regain control, Miriam's mind raced, calculating her exit amid the confusion. Soldiers bellowed orders, their voices drowned in the tumult. But she moved with purpose, blending into the mass of desperate bodies pressing toward the camp's broken gates. She slipped past a guard who was battling flames, her breath hitching as she saw him stumble, his face contorted in fury and disbelief. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Kraus himself. Moments before, he was overwhelmed by the chaos, his face twisted in rage and fear. Without hesitation, Miriam veered toward a narrow side exit, her legs pounding against the icy ground, every step fueled by an unwavering belief that this was more than just escape. It was her silent declaration of rebellion. As she squeezed through the jagged opening, the cold wind bit into her skin, but she felt an overwhelming surge of victory. She cast a quick glance back at the inferno and the tumult behind her, knowing that her actions, her cunning and bravery, had set in motion a ripple that would resonate far beyond this night. Free now. She disappeared into the dark woods, her figure swallowed by the shadows, her mind already racing with the next steps of resistance. Miriam had become more than a prisoner. She was a symbol of unwavering defiance, her escape a testament to the power of ingenuity and moral courage in the face of systemic evil. From a distant hill, Miriam watched the chaos unfold below her, like a fractured mirror reflecting her own defiance. The inferno burned fiercely, casting flickering shadows over the disarrayed camp, smoke curling upward, mingling with the frigid winter air, while the distant shouts and the clang of collapsing structures echoed her victory and her peril. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw guards stumbling, some clutching their stomachs, others frantically barking orders that dissolved into wild panic. Captain Kraus, his face flushed with rage and disbelief, was desperately trying to regain control, but the chaos had swallowed his authority whole. A faint smile tugged at Miriam's lips. "This is only the beginning," she whispered to herself, voice trembling yet resolute. Her fingers brushed the small pouch of herbs and toxins hidden in her coat, a silent reminder of how cunning had fueled her rebellion. She remembered Elias's nervous glance when she handed him the poisoned food, hope flickering in his eyes, a silent promise that her act was more than revenge. It was a spark meant to ignite future resistance. She had risked everything, her safety, her morality, her very life. Every moment of planning had led to this, an explosive chaos that would ripple through the camp for days, perhaps weeks, destabilizing the oppressive system from within. Now, standing in the shadows, her heart pounding against her ribs, Miriam felt a profound shift within her, a transformation from a cautious prisoner resigned to her fate to a cunning rebel who dared to challenge the system's cruelty. She clenched her fists, feeling the cold wind bite into her skin, and whispered fiercely, "They may think they control us, but tonight, their own arrogance has betrayed them." As the flames roared and guards scrambled amidst the debris, she knew her journey was far from over. This act of ingenuity was only the seed of something greater. She had become more than a survivor. She was a symbol of unyielding resistance, her spirit now intertwined with the hopes of those still imprisoned, and those yet to come. With a final glance at the burning camp, Miriam turned away, disappearing into the dark woods, determined to continue her fight for justice in the shadows, her mind already plotting the next move. Silent, precise, relentless. As whispers of Miriam's daring act of sabotage seeped through the underground networks of resistance and survivor circles, her legend grew quietly but unstoppable. Stories told in hushed tones around flickering campfires and hidden corners of liberated towns painted her as the Jewish avenger, a symbol of courage woven into the fabric of whispered hope. "Did you hear what she did?" a gaunt survivor, would ask, voice trembling with both awe and grief. She poisoned 10 guards with her own food, right here in the camp, and almost got us all killed. But she also showed us that even in the darkest depths, a spark of cunning can ignite a revolution. Silence would fall as others nodded, eyes shining with the unspoken belief that Miriam's resilience had transcended mere survival. It had become an act of defiant moral resistance. Her story, passed from one trembling hand to another, became a blueprint of silent rebellion, meticulously crafted, deeply personal, yet universally inspiring. It was her ingenuity in blending her limited resources, her clandestine knowledge of herbs and flavors, her careful timing, her unwavering resolve, that transformed her into an icon. The narrative emphasized her moral complexity, a woman haunted by loss yet driven by an unquenchable fire to strike back against systemic evil. She risked everything, even her life, an elder survivor would say, voice thick with emotion. In her food, she hid her defiance, poison so subtle that even the guards, so proud of their control, couldn't see the danger until it was too late. The stories painted her as more than a mere rebel. They depicted her as a symbol of hope, rooted in ingenuity, moral strength, and the unbreakable will to resist. Her act, once a secret, had become a catalyst, an enduring legacy of resistance that inspired others to see that justice, however clandestine, was worth fighting for. Deep in the collective memory of those who had suffered and survived, Miriam's name embodied the quiet power of intelligence and moral resilience, reminding everyone that even in the depths of despair, a single act of defiance could ignite the flames of change, forever etching her into the history of resistance as the Jewish avenger, a beacon of hope amid the shadows. Narrative development following, the story closes with Miriam walking away from the camp's ruins into the horizon, her figure silhouetted against the dawn, symbolizing hope and her unwavering commitment to fight oppression through intelligence, sacrifice, and moral strength. The story continues exploring the central themes of the original prompt, with unique characters and engaging situations that keep the reader interested in the development of events and conflicts presented in a rich and detailed manner.